My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 34. And the morning everything changed began like every other quiet, productive, full of hope. I was standing in my kitchen in Portland, pouring oat milk into my coffee laptop, open checking emails from our international clients. The sun filtered through the linen curtains, casting that warm gold glow that always made me feel safe. Accomplished. Like maybe I was finally earning my place. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my uncle Daniel Whitman, CEO of Whitman and Daughters Antiques, a family-run legacy business I'd poured 12 years of my life into. I pressed play. Claire, after last night's board vote, your services are no longer required at Whitman and Daughters. Your access is revoked. Your belongings will be shipped. Do not contact the office or any board members. This decision is final. The tone was sterile, practiced, not a single word of thanks, no emotion, just dismissal. I froze the phone still in my hand, coffee forgotten. 12 years gone. No warning, no meeting, no explanation, just a 1-minute voicemail. My hand trembled as I typed back a one-word response. Noted. But here's what they didn't know: I wasn't defeated. That word wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Before I tell you how I turned that betrayal into the most powerful chapter of my life, take a second. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated, pushed out, or betrayed by the people who should have stood by you. Because this isn't just my story, it's all of ours. Let's rewind a bit. Whitman and Daughters was supposed to be my inheritance, not just in the financial sense, but in spirit. My grandfather, Caleb Whitman, founded the company in 1958, hauling antique trunks from estate sales and restoring them with his own 2 hands. He built it from scratch, and his dream was always to pass it to his granddaughter, not his sons, me. I used to sit on a little wooden stool in the workshop while he explained the grain of mahogany or the way French dovetails were stronger than anything machine made. He'd say, "Claire, this isn't just business, it's memory, it's story, and it needs a heart to lead it, not just a head." He made me feel like I was meant to do something rare, important. But then he died, and everything changed. The business passed to his sons, my uncle Daniel, and my father, Robert Whitman. My dad was a silent partner, more interested in his law firm than family antiques. But Daniel took the reins with cold precision and dollar signs in his eyes. Gone were the handwritten stories that once accompanied each piece. In came digital barcodes, mass restoration, and aggressive expansion. Still, I stuck around. I'd promised my grandfather. I studied art history and cultural preservation. I interned at museums. Then came back home and started from the bottom. Cleaning pieces, cataloging. Eventually working my way up to creative director, a title they gave me but never respected. Every idea I pitched was met with resistance. I suggested partnerships with heritage-focused influencers. Daniel said, "No one wants sentiment. They want shiny." I proposed opening a digital archive to honor the stories behind each item. Daniel said, "Too much overhead." And when I asked to bring in my own restoration team focused on sustainable methods, he laughed in my face. "Claire, you're not here to make this your art project. Stick to marketing." And that was when I started noticing the pattern. The more I tried to innovate, the more I was sidelined. My cousin Emma Daniel's daughter was being brought in for every key meeting despite no background in antiques. She had an MBA and a trust fund, and that was apparently enough. But I still believed I could win them over with results. I worked 70-hour weeks, brought in 3 high-profile clients from the West Coast, curated a sold-out private event for collectors in New York. I doubled our social engagement in a year. None of it mattered. Because the night before the voicemail, the night I thought we were celebrating my promotion, I was actually being eliminated. I'd stayed late finalizing the concept for a new campaign, one that tied together heritage, sustainability, and storytelling. The theme was, "Every piece holds a past." I didn't know it then, but Emma had already taken credit for it in a closed-door board meeting. The vote to remove me happened right then, while I was still in the building, and the next morning they discarded me like an afterthought. But they miscalculated something. They thought I'd beg, apologize, fade into the background like a good little girl who forgot her place. What they forgot is I don't quit, and I never forgot what my grandfather taught me. This business was never supposed to be a spreadsheet. It was supposed to be a legacy built with hands, love, and memory. And if they were going to erase me from it, I was going to build something better with my name, my values, and the artisans they had discarded. But first I needed to sit with the grief, because betrayal doesn't just sting, it hollows you out. And I was about to fall into the deepest part of it. I didn't cry, not right away. I sat in my kitchen coffee, still untouched voicemail, playing on a loop like some sick mantra. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing. What had I done wrong? Why no warning? How could they just cut me out? I tried to stand, but ended up sliding to the floor, still in my silk robe, staring at the cabinets I'd once spent weekends sanding and painting by hand. They were mine, just like the legacy I thought I was building at Whitman and Daughters. The silence in the room was deafening. My first instinct was to call my dad, not Uncle Daniel, not Emma, my father. The man who once told me he was proud of my old soul, who watched me work for years without ever stepping in to defend me. I called, straight to voicemail. I left nothing. What was I supposed to say? Hey Dad, did you know your daughter just got fired from her own family legacy? I texted him instead, 3 words. Did you know? He never responded. Instead, a knock came at my door around noon. I opened it to find Eleanor, my assistant, former assistant, holding a cardboard box. I didn't want a courier to do it, she said, voice trembling. They packed it up already. I'm so sorry, Claire. She handed me the box, a mess of tangled paper folders, an old mug, some half-destroyed notebooks. My sketch pad was missing. So were my personal design notes. I looked up at her. Who gave the order? She didn't answer, just wiped a tear from her cheek and walked away. The rage didn't hit until later, when I opened the box and realized my grandfather's handwritten journal pages were missing. I'd kept a few of them in my desk drawer. Pages from the early days, notes on finishes and styles. Even a little poem he'd written about preserving craft over chasing profit. Gone. I knew exactly who had taken them. Emma. Or Amanda, the office manager who idolized her. Or both. That night my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin. This was a hard decision, but necessary. I hope you will find something more in line with your strengths. Take care. Take care. Take care. I gripped the phone so hard I thought I might crush it in my hand. I typed back, message received, then deleted it. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of red wine from the cabinet curled up on the couch and did the only thing I could manage. I called Joanna. Joanna Kingsley had been my best friend since college. She was a florist, now owned her own shop across town, and had an uncanny ability to sense when I was spiraling. She picked up immediately. You saw the news, I said. She paused. What news? I hesitated. I was fired. Silence. Then Claire, what? Voicemail. No warning. I'm out. They even packed my stuff. Oh my God, I heard a crash in the background. Probably a vase. I'm coming over. Do you want wine or tequila? Both. She arrived 20 minutes later with a bag of Thai food, a bottle of Malbec, a half-used bottle of Patron, and an expression that said someone was about to get verbally destroyed. We sat on the floor like we were 22 again. I told her everything, the voicemail, the missing designs, the silence from my father, the message from Emma. Joanna listened in furious silence. They're threatened by you, she said finally. They always have been. I don't know if I can do this again. Build something new. Start over. You built that company's brand with your own hands. You can build something else, something better, and this time you'll own it. I shook my head. I don't even know where to start. Start by remembering who you are. She said it with such certainty that I believed her, if only for a moment. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a strange clarity. I pulled open my closet, grabbed the one box I hadn't opened in years, my grandfather's original sketchbook, the one he'd given me when I turned 21. Inside was a folded letter, the ink faded with time. To Claire, you have the soul of a craftsman and the heart of a storyteller. Never let them tell you this work isn't worthy of feeling. Build what they're too afraid to imagine. That was all it took. The flicker of rage in my chest burned into something else. Purpose. They had erased me from the company, from the board, from my role, but they hadn't erased the values that made me who I am. I wasn't going to fight them directly. I was going to eclipse them. I picked up my phone and texted Joanna. You still know that angel investor who likes rebellious women and hates corporate culture? She replied instantly. His name is David, and he's going to love you. The investor meeting wasn't what I expected. For one thing, David Langston didn't wear suits. He met me at a neighborhood cafe in sneakers and a graphic tee that said, "Disrupt the system." He ordered an oat milk cortado and listened, really listened, as I pitched him a business that didn't fully exist yet. I told him about my idea to create an antiques and restoration brand that honored legacy while embracing sustainable values. A curated, storytelling-driven space that celebrated craftsmanship and history, not just sales volume. Every piece would come with a provenance profile who restored it where it came from, what it meant. I want to build something that remembers where it came from, I said, but dares to imagine where it can go. He smiled. And you were fired for this kind of thinking? Essentially, yes. He sipped his coffee. I like rebels. How much do you need? The question took me off guard. You're interested? He shrugged. Your passion's real. Your concept fills a growing gap. And your family just did the most predictable thing an old guard company could do, silence the innovator. That's a red flag for them, but a green light for me. I didn't cry, but something shifted inside me, a loosening of fear, a flicker of possibility. By the end of the week, I had a signed agreement David would front $150,000 in seed capital for a 15% temporary stake with a buyback clause once the company turned a profit. We shook hands, and just like that, I was no longer unemployed. I was a founder. I named it Goldenrow, a nod to the golden row of craftsmen my grandfather used to refer to the artisans he said formed the heart of any good business. They're not the ones up front, he'd say. They're the ones in the back making the magic happen. I would make this business for them. And for me, the next step was building a team. That part was easy. The restoration lead was always going to be Marisol Vega. She was one of the few remaining true woodworkers left in the city. She'd worked freelance for Whitman and Daughters for 8 years until Daniel laid her off the previous spring under the guise of modernizing operations. Translation, she cost too much and had too many opinions. She met me in the back of her tiny workshop, her sleeves rolled up and her hands covered in sawdust. I knew they'd screw you eventually, she said before I even opened my mouth. You in? She didn't hesitate. Where and when? Next, I called Gabe Sinclair, a metalsmith who specialized in antique locks and hinges. The man could restore a 200-year-old chest clasp better than anyone I'd ever met. Whitman had dropped him for cheaper, faster vendors overseas. You're not hiring me as a favor, are you? He asked, brow furrowed. No, I'm building something real. I need the best. Then I'm in. By the second week, we had a team of 5. We weren't fancy. We didn't have a showroom. We had a rented warehouse space and some secondhand equipment and a whiteboard full of scribbled ideas. But we had soul. And purpose? Joanna came by often helping with branding. She designed our logo, an abstract line of 5 golden figures standing in a row, a nod to the name and our team. We set a launch date 4 months out. I spent my days contacting the old vendors Whitman had discarded. Some ignored me. Others called back immediately, thrilled to work with someone who actually cared about the work. Elise Tremblay, our French fabric specialist, wept on the phone when I told her I wanted to feature her handmade velvet on a restored Victorian settee. They told me my techniques were outdated, she said. You're the first one who's made me feel like an artist in years. I cried after that call. Not because I was sad, but because I finally remembered why I loved this work. And why I couldn't let what Daniel and Emma did define me. But just as things began to click into place, the past came knocking. One morning, a manila envelope appeared on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a printed email chain between Emma and a luxury resale conglomerate. Whitman and Daughters was in talks to sell a controlling interest to a private firm based out of New York. They weren't just removing me, they were preparing to sell out. The date on the final email? 2 days before my termination. So much for hard decisions or misalignment of values. They didn't fire me because I wasn't a fit. They fired me because I was a threat to the deal. A liability? I dropped the pages onto the table, heart pounding. And then I noticed the last message in the chain. Regarding Claire's removal, we will ensure the messaging aligns with industry standards, no scandal, no resistance. Transition should be clean. Clean. They were talking about me like a mess to sweep up. I stood there for several minutes, fists clenched, staring at those words. They had no idea what they'd just done. They hadn't just removed me from their story. They'd given me the fire to write my own, and I wasn't going to go quietly. The next few days passed in a blur of adrenaline, planning, and rage that felt focused. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't crying, I wasn't floundering, I was building. And I was watching. Every move Whitman and Daughters made now felt like a tell in a game of poker they thought they were winning. I still had friends on the inside, quiet allies, who didn't agree with what had been done to me. One of them was Noah Grayson, a junior designer I'd mentored the past 2 years. He texted me the afternoon after I received the envelope. Can we talk off the record? We met at a food truck downtown. He wouldn't sit until he checked both directions for familiar faces. They're calling you unstable, he said quietly. Said you quit without warning. That you burned out. I blinked. He nodded. Emma's spinning a full narrative. Mental health issues. That you needed space. The implication hit like a gut punch. They're not just cutting me out. They're rewriting the story. He nodded grimly. And positioning Emma to be the face of the brand going forward. She's presenting your past in every piece campaign as her own concept next week to the board and the investors. Of course she was. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. She's also pushing to rename the company, Noah added. Just Whitman Collective. Dropping the "and daughters." That broke something in me. They weren't just stealing my ideas. They were erasing our grandmother too, the very woman who used to hand-stitch the original branding tags when my grandfather first launched the business in his garage. It wasn't just corporate theft. It was personal. I thanked Noah, warned him to stay careful, and walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment in a red haze of fury. By the time I got home, a plan was forming. I couldn't stop them from selling the company. I couldn't get back the job they'd taken from me, but I could stop the narrative from being rewritten. I would make the truth visible in every corner of the industry. The next morning, I called Lena Moritz, an old contact from a design magazine who'd once profiled our work at Whitman. She answered with her usual dry humor. "Tell me you're not calling to pitch antique wood again." "Actually, I'm launching my own brand." Pause. "You serious?" "I'm launching Goldenrow, story-based, artisan-driven antique restoration with sustainable practices. First collection drops this fall." "Claire, is this because of the firing?" "It's because of the erasure. I'm not just building something new, I'm reclaiming what I made before they tried to delete me." She was silent for a beat. "I want the exclusive." 2 weeks later, the feature went live on her magazine's site under the headline, "Fired, Forgotten, and Free, Claire Whitman's bold new chapter in artisan restoration." The piece didn't slam Whitman and Daughters by name, but it didn't have to. The tone was clear, the facts spoke volumes, and more importantly, it humanized me, gave me back my voice. Within hours, my inbox flooded with support from independent artisans, vendors, and even former Whitman clients. But not everyone was thrilled. That evening, a cease and desist letter arrived at my new office space, Goldenrow's still sawdusty studio on the edge of the warehouse district. The letter accused me of using proprietary campaign themes and confusing brand imagery, citing a potential overlap with their current promotional plans. It was petty and hollow, and it told me one thing loud and clear. They were scared. I called David, our investor. "They're threatening legal action," I said. He didn't even blink. "Good. It means you're doing something right." We laughed, but behind that laughter was something real. Momentum. Validation. And that night, something even more unexpected happened. An email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Henry Caldwell, a high-end art collector and patron who had once been my grandfather's most loyal client. Subject: Goldenrow. His message was simple. I read the article. "I always knew you were the soul of the operation. I want to commission a private series of 3 pieces, authentic restoration, full provenance. Are you up for it?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Yes, let's make history." The next day, Joanna walked into the office and found me sketching restoration plans at my workbench with tears streaming down my face. She knelt beside me. "What is it?" I feel like I'm finally doing the thing I was always meant to do, and no one can take it from me." She smiled. They tried, they failed. We hugged, and then she pulled back with a devilish glint in her eyes. "Now let's ruin their rebrand." The thing about reputations, especially in tightly knit industries like antiques and heritage restoration, is that they're built slowly, but can crumble overnight. And Whitman and Daughters' rebrand was already wobbling. The article had stirred up conversation in every corner of the industry. People remembered the old Claire, the one who curated with purpose, who fought to keep stories alive inside every piece of wood, velvet, and brass. And when they compared that memory to Emma's cold corporate relaunch campaign, it didn't land. Their first big reveal, a social media teaser for the Modern Legacy collection, was met with mixed reviews. Critics called it soulless, generic, disconnected from the company's roots. One comment, reposted thousands of times, summed it up perfectly. "Where's the heart? This isn't Whitman. This looks like restoration hardware with a trust fund." Meanwhile, Goldenrow was gaining traction faster than I could have dreamed. Lena's article had done more than restore my name. It had built intrigue. Orders were coming in small at first, then steadily more ambitious. The press request inbox Joanna had set up was constantly pinging. And then came the moment I didn't see coming. Kylie Brooks, a lifestyle blogger with over 4 million followers, messaged us directly. "Saw your story. I'm redecorating my studio. Want to collaborate?" A week later, we shipped her a restored French parlor set and a hand-carved armoire from the 1860s restored by Marisol, who cried when she saw the feature Kylie posted 2 days later. Goldenrow wasn't just a business. It was a movement, one rooted in legacy, transparency, and rebellion. And nothing threatened the old guard more than a woman who refused to disappear. 3 weeks after the launch, I got a phone call I wasn't expecting. My father. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. His message was brief. Claire, I heard about the article, about Goldenrow. I think we need to talk. Not as business people, as family. I sat on the floor of the studio phone in my hand, staring at the drywall we hadn't finished painting. I should have felt triumph, vindication, but instead I just felt tired. Because the truth was, even now part of me still wanted his approval, even after everything. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Lawrence, the family trust attorney who'd helped handle my grandfather's estate after his passing. I asked one simple question. Do I have any legal rights left to his original intellectual property? Lawrence sighed. Your grandfather left you more than just personal notes and old sketches, Claire. His trust designated you as a successor not to run the company, but to protect the spirit of it. That matters. He told me something else, too. That just weeks before his death, my grandfather had submitted documentation to the Copyright Office designs, taglines, mission statements, and personal writings, all tied to the original Whitman and Daughters brand. And I had been listed as co-author on nearly half of them. You may not own the company, Lawrence said, but you still own part of the story. That night, I finally opened the last of my grandfather's notebooks, the one I'd been too scared to read since the day I was fired. Inside was a letter I'd never seen before. To the future of this work, Claire, if you're reading this, it means the company no longer sees what you bring to it. That doesn't make them right. It just means it's your time to lead in your own way. Protect the past. But never let it stop you from building the future. I closed the notebook with shaking hands, and I knew what I had to do next. Not sue, not grovel, not wait for validation. I was going to expand. Up until that moment, Goldenrow had been operating out of a rented workshop. Now we were ready for a home. And I knew exactly where I wanted it to be, the original Whitman workshop, the one my grandfather built with his own hands on Green Lake Street, now a vacant shell after years of neglect. I made an offer, and a month later it was mine. The irony was thick. They had pushed me out of the empire, and I had claimed its soul. I stood inside the dusty building with sunlight pouring through the cracked windows, imagining the space filled with new-life craftsmen at workbenches, the smell of polish and sawdust, the sound of restoration in progress. It felt like I could finally breathe again. That week, I sent 2 invitations. One to Lawrence thanking him for protecting my grandfather's wishes, and one anonymously to my cousin Emma. Goldenrow is opening a new flagship location. You're welcome to visit. You might learn something about honoring a legacy instead of selling it. The day of the flagship opening arrived like a storm, equal parts chaos and anticipation. We'd spent weeks preparing the Green Lake Street workshop, scrubbing the original beams, restoring the hand-carved doorway, even salvaging one of the original shop signs, Whitman Woodworks Est, 1958. I didn't care that my last name was still painted across it. That legacy belonged to me no matter how hard they tried to pretend otherwise. Goldenrow's opening wasn't a gala. It wasn't staged. There were no glossy PR packets or press-ready photo ops. It was open doors, working artisans, and real clients invited to walk through, touch the pieces, hear the stories behind them. It was everything I'd always wanted Whitman and Daughters to be. By 10 a.m., people were already lining up. By noon, a local reporter who had previously covered Emma's Modern Legacy campaign was tweeting about how Goldenrow has more history in one shelf than the whole Whitman showroom. I didn't even have time to celebrate. I was answering questions, giving mini-tours, shaking hands with clients who'd followed my journey from the magazine article. And then I saw her. Emma. She stood across the street, flanked by 2 men in navy suits. No press, no camera crew. Just her, watching. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. But I didn't look away either. She stared for a long moment, then turned and walked off without crossing over. Message received. The very next morning, Lawrence called me again. I've received a letter, he said, from Whitman's legal team. Another cease and desist. No, an offer. That made me sit up straighter. What kind of offer? They want to buy out the Goldenrow brand name before your next collection launches. A private arrangement. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a generous sum and a signed NDA. I laughed loud and bitter. They're trying to buy me off. They're trying to keep you quiet, he corrected gently. Goldenrow's eating their narrative alive. You've got the community, the heart, and the story. They have a weakening reputation and a buyer backing out of their acquisition because of brand instability. I knew what this was. It was a white flag. Not a peace offering, but a bribe wrapped in expensive stationery. I didn't even need to think about it. Tell them my answer is the same as it was on day 1. He chuckled softly. Understood. Exactly. The following week, I sat down with Joanna and the rest of the team to plan our first traveling exhibition, restored pieces with interactive storytelling and artisan demonstrations set to tour small museums and boutique galleries across the country. This isn't just about furniture, I told them. This is about reclaiming ownership of heritage and reminding people that value doesn't come from price tags or branding. It comes from people. Joanna beamed. From women, she added. Let's be honest, this is a women-led reclamation. She wasn't wrong. Goldenrow wasn't just a company, it was a rebellion. A restoration of voices that had been dismissed, diluted, discredited. Mine, Marisol's, Joanna's, Elise's. Every artisan who had been told their methods were outdated, their standards inconvenient, their intuition unprofessional. We were the future because we honored the past without being shackled to it. The night before the exhibition launch, I stood alone in the flagship showroom staring at a finished piece, an 1870s English sideboard I'd spent weeks helping restore. Tucked inside its top drawer was a small brass plaque. I'd added it myself. Restored with heart, not haste. Goldenrow 2024. I closed the drawer, took a deep breath, and let the moment settle into my bones. There was still so much ahead. Legal threats, business hurdles, emotional wounds that hadn't fully healed. But I was no longer defined by what I'd lost. I was defined by what I was building, and they would never be able to erase that. 2 days after our exhibition launched, my inbox exploded. Not just with orders, though, there were plenty, but with something else I hadn't expected. Letters, emails, handwritten notes, DMs. Dozens from women across the country. Some were entrepreneurs who'd been pushed out of family businesses. Others were daughters overlooked by brothers' wives, erased by husbands. Creatives dismissed by boardrooms. One stood out a letter from a woman named Nancy R. in Savannah. I watched your interview and cried. My father left our bookstore to my brother even though I ran it for 15 years. He said it was a man's responsibility. I've been trying to start my own bookshop ever since. Seeing what you've done with Goldenrow gave me hope. Thank you. I sat at my desk with tears pooling in my eyes. Joanna walked in, took one look at me, and immediately asked which email. I handed her the printout. She read it silently, then set it down. You're not just restoring furniture, you're restoring women. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. And that was when we decided to start the Legacy Project, an initiative to offer mentorship and microgrants to other women starting their own heritage-based businesses. Every month, a portion of our profits would go toward funding their ventures. Bookshops, vintage boutiques, textile studios, traditional bakeries, anyone who wanted to preserve something meaningful in a world obsessed with the next thing. Marisol cried when we announced it at our Monday meeting. Gabe nodded solemnly and said, "This is what real legacy looks like." We launched it with minimal fanfare, just a quiet webpage, a short video, and a message from me that read, "They tried to erase my work, so I built a platform for others. Because legacy should never be controlled by the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to those who carry it with care." The press picked it up almost instantly. By the end of the week, we had applications from 200 women in 41 states. Goldenrow wasn't just making noise, it was building a new ecosystem. But with growth came complications. One morning, Lawrence called again, this time sounding urgent. "They're trying to block your exhibition from appearing at the New York Craftsmanship Guild," he said. "Wait, what?" "The guild is traditionally sponsored by Whitman and Daughters. Emma's claiming conflict of interest. She's saying your exhibit would undermine their brand identity." I couldn't help but laugh. "You mean because I am the brand identity?" Lawrence didn't laugh. "They're afraid, Claire. Their acquisition deal is in shambles. Lux Holdings is reconsidering after seeing your rise. Their sales are down. Key clients are jumping ship. This isn't about a guild appearance. It's about survival." My first instinct was to fight, to write a scathing public letter, to call every journalist who'd ever asked for an inside scoop. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to say, "When someone throws mud, don't get down in the pit. Build higher." So instead I made a different call. I rang Henry Caldwell, the patron who had commissioned the first Goldenrow pieces. "Henry," I said, "how would you feel about hosting our exhibition in your private gallery instead?" He chuckled. "You know how long I've waited to stick it to that smug old guard. You've got the space. And the spotlight." The new venue made headlines. And the New York Craftsmanship Guild. They received backlash for bowing to corporate pressure, including several resignations from longtime members, one of whom told The Times, "Claire Whitman represents the spirit of the craft. Excluding her undermines everything we stand for." Emma tried to spin it, claimed she'd had no idea about the exclusion. but the damage was done. Goldenrow's private showcase outperformed the Guild's annual event in attendance coverage and sales. And with that, something finally shifted in the narrative. Not just in public perception, but in mine. For the first time, I wasn't just recovering from betrayal. I was winning, on my terms. With my team, with my values, and no amount of corporate branding could compete with that. By fall, we were no longer the underdog. Goldenrow was being talked about on podcasts, featured in design magazines, and discussed in industry forums, not just as a promising new business, but as a symbol of integrity. Clients were calling us first, not because we were louder, but because we were real. And with every milestone we hit, another domino fell inside Whitman and Daughters. It started with a resignation, then 2, then 5. First, the lead artisan left to join an independent studio in Chicago. Then their PR head was poached by a boutique firm. Then one of their legacy clients, the Caldwell Estate, a multi-million-dollar account, publicly moved their entire collection to Goldenrow. And then came the big one. Lux Holdings officially backed out of the acquisition. The press release was cold and vague, strategic redirection, incompatible growth philosophies focus, shifting toward modern assets. But I knew what it meant. They'd looked at the numbers, read the headlines, and realized Whitman and Daughters wasn't the future of the industry anymore. Goldenrow was. I heard about the failed deal not from a newspaper, but from Lucas, one of the senior executives at Lux, who had attended our private New York exhibition. He sent me a 2-line email. I told them to bet on you. They didn't listen. Their loss. I sat with those words longer than I care to admit. And then, like clockwork, my father called again. I let it ring again. But this time, I didn't delete the voicemail. Claire, I don't know how to say this, but I miss you. Not the business stuff. Just you. Maybe I should have stepped in sooner. Maybe I let Daniel control too much. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to talk. When you're ready. It should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, it made me feel old. Not in years, but in grief. Because no matter how much success I built, no matter how high Goldenrow soared, there was a part of me that still mourned the version of my family I thought could exist. A version where legacy was honored and daughters weren't discarded. That night, I visited my grandfather's grave for the first time in almost a year. I brought him a small token, a brass plaque with the Goldenrow emblem etched into it. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered, kneeling in the grass. They tried to cut me out, but I made something better. I didn't just survive, I honored you. The wind shifted softly, and for a second I swore I could hear his voice. Build what they're too afraid to imagine. The next day I called my father. We didn't meet at the house, too many ghosts there. Instead, we met at a quiet bench outside the local botanical gardens, surrounded by fading flowers and the rustle of September leaves. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature, but in presence. As if the fall of the company had taken something from him. I'm sorry, he said as soon as I sat down. You didn't deserve what happened. I said nothing. I thought protecting the family name meant holding the line, keeping everything the same. But I see now, you were trying to save it, not change it. I just couldn't see past my own fear. Still, I said nothing. He looked at me, then eyes tired. You've built something incredible, better than we ever did. I exhaled slowly. I didn't do it for revenge, Dad. Not really. I know. I did it because I couldn't let the story die. He nodded, eyes misting. Your grandfather would be proud. I know. We sat in silence after that. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. He didn't ask for involvement. He didn't offer money. He didn't even suggest a collaboration. And for the first time in my life, I realized that was enough. Acknowledgement without expectation. Respect. Without control. That same week, Emma sent me an email. Not an apology, not a cease and desist, just a single sentence. I guess I finally understand what you were trying to do. I didn't reply. Some letters don't need to be answered. Because by then, I had already turned the page. Fall melted into winter, and Goldenrow prepared for its most ambitious launch, yet the Heirloom Revival Collection, a curated selection of rare 19th and 20th century pieces, each restored by hand and paired with a multimedia story of its history. We didn't just show the furniture, we told its story. One piece had survived the Great Chicago Fire. Another had belonged to a seamstress who'd left coded love letters in a hidden compartment. Every item was a living memory, not just a commodity. And our clients responded. The pre-order waitlist passed 500 names in 2 weeks. Joanna stood in our showroom one night, arms crossed, eyes shimmering. This was your vision, and now it's breathing. I looked around. The workshop buzzed with quiet focus, artisans hunched over benches, tea steaming on desks, wood dust catching in the beams of soft light. It wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary. For craft, for legacy, for those of us who'd been pushed out of the stories we were meant to inherit. And still, I felt the pull of the past. It arrived again in the form of a package at the front desk. No return label, just my name handwritten in that neat, careful script I knew all too well. Inside a worn leather notebook, my grandfather's, the one that had disappeared from my office after my firing. Tucked inside was a small card. I found this in Emma's files. It never belonged to her. It belongs with you, NG. Noah. My throat tightened. I flipped through the pages, drawings, pressed fabric samples, handwritten notes about pieces he'd restored in the 70s and 80s. But near the back, I found something else. A letter, unsealed, never sent. It was addressed to me, Claire. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you what I should have said long ago. You are the true heir of this work. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you understand what it means. The soul of restoration isn't profit, it's reverence. It's preservation. And you carry it like a torch. No matter what others say, never let go of that light. I pressed the notebook to my chest, tears slipping quietly down my cheeks. I had carried so much anger for so long, righteous earned anger. But grief is rarely clean, and legacies come with weight. The next day, I gathered the team and told them we were dedicating the Heirloom Revival Collection to Caleb Whitman, master restorer and original storyteller. Not as a branding tactic, but as a truth. Because no matter how the business fractured, he was the origin point. And we were his evolution. As we prepped the gallery for the launch, an invitation arrived handwritten again from the guild. The real guild. The one Emma had tried to shut me out of. They wanted Goldenrow to keynote their annual winter symposium. Not just participate, lead it. Joanna read the invitation twice. You realize what this means? I do. They're officially choosing you over Whitman. I nodded. Not me. The values, the work. She smirked. Same thing. I stood at that podium 2 weeks later, the hall filled with artisans, historians, preservationists, people who had whispered my name in pity a year ago now, watching with something closer to admiration. I told them the truth. About what was taken. About what was built. About what it means to hold on to stories even when the world tries to tell you they're not worth anything. And I ended with this. Legacy doesn't live in a logo. It lives in hands, in memory, in those brave enough to protect what others discard. This is for anyone who's ever been pushed out of a room they helped build, go build another, and make it better. The room stood, not just applause solidarity. For the first time I felt not just respected. I felt seen. The night after the symposium, I sat alone in the restored front office of our Green Lake Street flagship. The fireplace crackled softly beside me, casting a warm glow over the old oak desk that had once belonged to my grandfather. On its surface sat a small collection of keepsakes, the original Goldenrow sketchpad, a handwritten note from Joanna, and the old business card of Caleb Whitman, its corners worn, the lettering slightly faded. I'd come so far. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that a final reckoning was still on the horizon. It arrived 2 days later in the form of a formal invitation from Whitman and daughters, or rather what remained of it. An invitation to a heritage roundtable. A desperate attempt from what I could tell to save face and feign unity after their failed acquisition, failed rebrand, and rapidly shrinking influence in the market. My name was scrawled in cursive on the envelope. Inside a note, we'd like to extend a seat at the table, to reconnect, to heal. Daniel and Emma Whitman. Joanna nearly shredded it on sight. They want a photo op, nothing more. She wasn't wrong. But I stared at the invitation for a long time, because beneath my anger and caution I was also curious. What did they expect from me? An apology, gratitude, or silence? I didn't reply right away. I needed to think. So I called Marisol, who met me at the workshop with coffee, and that no-nonsense energy that always grounded me. I think you should go, she said, surprising me. Why? Because you don't need them. And when you don't need someone, it's easier to speak your truth. Not for them. For you. She was right. I RSVP'd with 2 words: I'll attend. The round table was held in an upscale event space near downtown. When I arrived, the room was glossy cold, exactly what you'd expect from a failing legacy brand trying to appear relevant. Dark wood paneling, branded banners, and catered hors d'oeuvres no one touched. There were maybe 30 people there, industry leaders, curators, a few journalists. I spotted Emma across the room immediately. She wore the same navy dress she used for every press event, her hair perfect, her smile practiced. She avoided my eyes. Daniel approached first. "Claire," he said, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it." I didn't take his hand. "You didn't think I'd show," I said instead. "I hoped you would. There's history here. History you tried to erase." He had the decency to look away. "Things got complicated," he muttered. "They got cruel," I corrected. Emma finally joined us. "Claire," she said carefully, "you've made quite a name for yourself." "I didn't do it to make a name. I did it to build what you broke." For the first time, her polished veneer cracked just slightly. The moderator called everyone to be seated. I sat near the end of the table, content to observe. I didn't plan to speak until Daniel asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Claire, how do you define legacy in a modern market?" The entire room turned toward me. I could have lashed out, unloaded a year's worth of betrayal. But instead I looked straight at him and answered with clarity. Legacy isn't a building. It's not a last name. It's the values that outlive us. It's how we treat the people who believed in us when no one else did. It's how we honor what came before without sacrificing what needs to come next. Silence. And then to my utter shock, applause. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. That night, as I walked out of the venue, Emma caught up to me. "I wasn't ready for what you were trying to do," she said quietly. "I see it now. You only saw it after it worked." She didn't deny it. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added, "but I wanted you to know I respect what you've built, and I envy it." I paused, considering her for the first time not as a rival, but as a cautionary tale. "You still have time," I said, "to build something real, but you'll have to do it from the ground up." She nodded once, and walked away. I stood outside the building for a moment, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. I wasn't just healing. I was free. Winter passed into spring, and with it came the quiet bloom of something I hadn't dared hope for in over a year. Peace. Goldenrow was thriving not in the viral, chaotic way of startups that burned hot and fast, but in the grounded, steady rhythm of a business rooted in purpose. Our client list had grown, yes, but more importantly, our mission had deepened. The Legacy Project was funding 5 new women-led ventures across the country, and our community was expanding beyond what I ever imagined. Every week, someone new came into our showroom with a story, a family heirloom, a whispered memory. We restored a quilt chest that had survived the Dust Bowl, a broken writing desk once used by a black teacher in a one-room schoolhouse, a pair of rocking chairs from a same-sex couple who'd been together since the 70s, but had never felt safe sharing their story until now. We didn't just fix things. We brought stories back to life. And in doing so, we rewrote the definition of what mattered in this industry. I was in the middle of preparing a proposal for a historical museum partnership when a familiar name popped up on my phone. Lucas Whitman. My cousin, Emma's brother. Unlike the others, Lucas had never taken a public stance in the fallout. He distanced himself from the company shortly after the Lux deal collapsed, starting a new consulting firm in the Midwest. I answered. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but reserved. "I wanted to ask you something, and I'll understand if the answer is no." I waited. "There's a client I'm working with, a small chain of historic hotels. They're rebranding with a focus on preservation and heritage. I told them about you." I raised an eyebrow. "You told them about me?" They read the article in Design Forward. They're interested in partnering with Goldenrow to outfit their lobbies with restored heritage pieces. Not replicas, the real thing. A high-profile commission, national exposure. But more than that, it was coming from inside the family tree. I hesitated. "What's in it for you?" He didn't flinch. "Nothing. I'm not taking a cut. I guess I wanted to contribute to something that actually matters." Silence. Then I said, "Email me the details. We'll consider it." And we did, because sometimes the best revenge isn't refusing to work with them. It's letting them contribute to the vision they once tried to crush on your terms. A week later, as I was walking through our workshop late one evening, I found a note pinned to the corkboard in the main studio. It was from Martin, one of our youngest apprentices. "Thank you for giving people like me a place to learn the old ways. My dad says this shop reminds him of how things used to feel before everything got so loud." I smiled, and for the first time I realized I didn't feel like I was proving myself anymore. I wasn't defending my worth or my legacy or my right to lead. I was simply living it. On the anniversary of my firing, the day my life was turned upside down, I returned to the same cafe where I'd met David Langston, our first investor. He met me with a grin and a warm handshake. "Did I make a good bet?" he teased. "You made a great one." We toasted with cortados. And when he asked me what came next, I didn't talk about sales projections or expansion. I said I want to teach. mentor, maybe even write a book. He nodded. Now that's a lasting legacy. Back at the shop, the team surprised me with a small celebration. Cupcakes, flowers, a hand-carved plaque that read, "Understood, the moment everything changed." It wasn't just a reference to that first message I'd sent when they fired me. It was the moment I claimed myself. Understood didn't mean passive acceptance. It meant clarity. It meant I see you, I see what you've done, and I'm choosing to rise anyway. A year to the day after I was fired, I stood beneath the arched beams of the restored Green Lake workshop and addressed a crowd of over 100. Journalists, clients, artisans, mentors, friends, all gathered for the unveiling of Goldenrow's anniversary collection, a line not just of restored heirlooms, but original pieces created by our team, built with reclaimed materials and infused with old-world methods. It was the first time we'd moved beyond restoration into creation, not as an escape from the past, but as a continuation of it. Every chair, every cabinet, every polished hinge told two stories, the one it had once lived and the one we were now giving it. We called it the Echo Line. Because echoes don't fade, they ripple. And this legacy, our legacy, was rippling farther than any of us could have imagined. As the guests wandered the space, sipping wine and tracing the curves of walnut and mahogany, I slipped away for a moment and stepped into the small private alcove that had once been my grandfather's office. It was mine now, but I'd left it mostly untouched, his frame notes still hanging the scent of linseed oil faint in the wood. I opened the drawer and pulled out the newest edition, a leather-bound journal crisp and unused. And I wrote, "They tried to erase me, but in doing so they gave me the space to become something bigger. They gave me the silence to hear my own voice, and the courage to rebuild a story that was always mine to tell." As I closed the journal, a soft knock came at the door. Joanna peeked in. "They're ready for the speech," she said, smiling. I took a breath, then stood and followed her back into the light. When I stepped up to the podium, I looked at the faces before me. Some I knew, some I didn't. All of them had chosen to believe in the power of what we'd built. "I want to thank you," I began. "Not just for being here, but for seeing value where others saw risk, for believing in craftsmanship over shortcuts, for standing with the storytellers when the spreadsheets tried to bury us." A beat of quiet. And then, this year didn't begin with a plan. It began with a voicemail. One sentence. "You're out of the family business, Claire. Don't call back." And one word. Understood. What they didn't know was that word wasn't defeat. It was my declaration of freedom, of vision, of self-worth. The room was still, breathless. I looked out over the crowd at Marisol, her eyes glinting, at Martin standing proudly by one of his first original pieces, at Elise, tears on her cheeks, and I smiled. Whatever you've lost, whatever has been taken, remember this. The story doesn't end when someone closes a door on you. Sometimes that's just where the real story begins. So if you've ever been underestimated, erased, or pushed out of something you built, don't wait for permission to come back. Build something better, and let them watch. The applause swelled thunderous, emotional, earned. Not for me alone, for all of us who've had to start over. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I got one last message, this time from an unknown number. It was a photo of my mother, standing outside the Goldenrow showroom. Looking through the window, there was no caption, no message. Just her watching, and this time I didn't feel anger, or longing, or even sadness. I felt peace, because she could look in all she wanted, but she could never come close to understanding what it took to build this. I didn't just reclaim a legacy, I redefined it, and now it belongs to me, forever. Has someone ever tried to erase your contribution, pushed you out of something you helped build? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey meant something to you, if you felt seen or inspired, please subscribe and share this with someone who might need the reminder. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, understood, and then go prove them wrong.